Opening shot. The quiet western suburb of Broadview has been thrust into the national spotlight after days of escalating protests outside an ICE detention facility. Broadview Mayor Katrina Thompson says she would like ICE and CBP officials to stop what she calls hostile actions in her community as federal agents have aggressively marketed their Operation Midway Blitz, leading to a predictable backlash. She says the constant use of tear gas and other munitions is wreaking havoc among first responders and residents.
ICE has to stop putting our residents, our police officers, our firefighters, and American citizens in harm's way. And because we are a democracy, I want to urge the protesters to continue to exercise your constitutional protected rights of free speech. But I want you to do it peacefully. I want you to raise your voices and not your fists.
And Broadview's Police Chief Thomas Mills says his department has now opened 3 investigations into ICE, including the alleged firing of a chemical munition into the car of a CBS 2 reporter unprovoked. Chief Mills says ICE responded that they would cooperate.
Well, I know who's working every day in my police department. Like you said, I have body-worn camera, all of my officers. They should have a log of who's working in there. So we just got to hope, and I'm hoping, that they'll be truthful and transparent in providing the information.
And in response to Broadview's overall concerns, an ICE agent responded, quote, "There will be no change in our operational posture until these unlawful activities cease. The only siege in Broadview is the one being waged against the United States government." These clashes have been filmed by supporters and opponents alike, spread into the social media silos where people either celebrate what's happening or condemn it. Broadview is simply staging ground for a fusillade of content. And President Trump today made the startling claim of a, quote, war from within, suggesting an ominous future of military combat in American cities. Right now, Broadview is the center of a different war, an information war, a war of optics and images aimed at winning your attention. The government shutdown deadline looms, how Illinois Republicans and Democrats plan to vote. President Trump says Chicago and other big cities should be, quote, training grounds for the military, as he emphasizes fighting the, quote, enemy within. When will Chicago see more federal troops on the streets? Consumer advocates press legislators to treat soaring utility bills as a crisis and to do something about it immediately. We'll tell you what. And Chicago's biggest hospitals join forces to form the Chicago Breast Cancer Consortium as Breast Cancer Awareness Month begins this week. And welcome to the Chicago Report. I'm Paris Schutz. So much to get to tonight, starting with the looming threat of a government shutdown. And that could happen in the next few hours unless some Hail Mary deal is reached. It all comes as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and President Trump address military generals on a change of philosophy in that department. President Trump says he believes cities like Chicago should be, quote, training grounds for the military.
And then I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military. Because we're going into Chicago very soon. That's a big city with an incompetent governor, stupid.
And now we're joined by Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth. Senator Duckworth, thanks very much. I know you've been in meetings all day about the continuing funding resolution, but I want to start with the comments from President Trump and Pete Hegseth before military generals today. President Trump basically saying he wants the Defense Department to fight the quote-unquote enemy within. He wants cities like Chicago to be training grounds for the military. We know now that there are plans to send up to 100 military personnel here to Chicago. What is your reaction to everything you're hearing today?
Point number one, it's illegal. This is why we overthrew the British and why we wrote the Constitution that we wrote. Posse comitatus is very real. Frankly, the fact is that if Governor Abbott is going to allow his Texas National Guardsmen to be activated to send into a city to fight crime, maybe he should start with one of the cities in Texas that have higher crime rates than Chicago.
And is that what you're hearing, that it's going to be other states' National Guard sent to Chicago, or is there anything you're hearing from sources within the Defense Department about what these plans are?
We're still waiting to see whether it's going to be National Guard activation or even active duty troops. But regardless, once they're on Title 10 status, they can only be on federal property. And so this is where, the murkiness of the whole situation. Look, they're just trying to intimidate us, and we can't allow them to intimidate us. And frankly, it is illegal. We're going to continue to fight them in the courts. But in the meantime, what I say to folks in Chicago is respect the troops. They don't have a choice. They'd rather be home. They didn't sign up for this. They signed up to defend America against our enemies around the world. They signed up to defend the Constitution. They did not sign up to police and intimidate their neighbors on the streets of our cities. And so we've got a president and a secretary of defense who are using our men and women in uniform as little toy soldiers for their own personal political gain. We have to reject that. We have to protest that, but in a peaceful way. At the same time, show some respect for the troops who are going to show up in our cities, and not give Trump the ammunition to claim that there's unrest, because it'll be very clear that we are peaceful in Chicago.
And Governor Pritzker has echoed that, worrying that that could be pretext for even further escalation. But I'm curious, as a veteran of active duty, when you hear the defense secretary say that there has to be certain, grooming standards for everybody and physical training standards, whether it's man or woman, the women would have to match the same physical training standards as the men. How do you think the military generals respond to that?
Yeah. So in the military, the physical fitness standards varies by age. So what is the standard for an 18-year-old man is not the same as a 45-year-old man. Interestingly, Pete Hegseth forgot to mention that. But frankly, the women and men in our military are qualified to do their jobs. They take these physical fitness tests every single year. And so those standards already exist. On the other hand, he says, I think he did a whole thing about fat generals and admirals. Again, height and weight standards already exist in the military. And if you really care about them at all levels, from youngest recruits to the highest ranking 4-star officers, maybe they need to start up worrying about the physical fitness standards for their commander in chief. Let's start with him.
Yeah,
Leaders lead by example, by the way, in the military. Maybe we should start with the physical fitness standards of our president.
All right, interesting point. Let's transition over to the shutdown or the possible shutdown here. Just to confirm, you are going to be a no vote on the continuing resolution?
Correct. I will be a no vote because at this point, they are not replacing the Affordable Care Act credits. Basically, I'm fighting to make sure that your health care costs do not go up. If we don't get these put back into the bill, healthcare costs for most Americans on the exchange will more than double. And so Americans across the country are going to see their healthcare costs. If you go from $7,000 to as high as $24,000 a year for just a couple. And so if they're not going to bring back funding for Medicaid, if they're not going to bring back funding for the Affordable Care Act, I don't see how I can vote for it.
And there are Republicans unanimously saying, and then even one of your Democratic colleagues, Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania, saying, but this is just a continuing resolution, and those kinds of policy votes should be reserved for something else, as opposed to just funding the government, just a clean resolution to fund the government. What about that?
With us, we're asking for this is what should be in there, and the fact that they are not even willing to negotiate with it. I mean, the House of Representatives isn't even in office. I mean, all the Republicans in the House of Representatives left town. The Democrats are here. I saw a picture of them on the floor on the House of Representatives. So they don't want Democratic votes. Frankly, President Trump has been saying from the time he got back in office that he wants to shut down government. The OMB director says they want to fire thousands and thousands of federal workers. These folks, this whole shutdown thing is about them wanting to shut down government so they can fire federal workers and so that they can continue to take away Americans' health care. We have in Illinois, we potentially are going to lose 9 hospitals and 93 nursing homes because of the Medicaid cuts. We need to make sure that we fight as hard as we can to restore those funds so that Americans don't see their health care costs at the very least double.
And now we're joined by Republican Illinois Congressman Darin LaHood of downstate Peoria. Congressman LaHood, always good to talk to you. What are the costs to the American people of a government shutdown right now?
Well, Paris, first of all, we have an obligation and a responsibility to keep the government open. And the House of Representatives did its job. So Friday, September 19th, we were in session. We voted to keep the government open. We did that in a bipartisan way. And that will keep the government open through November 20th. So that passed. It's now sitting in the Senate. So the Senate and Chuck Schumer, the Democrats, have an opportunity to pass that today, just like we did in a bipartisan way to keep the government open. Remember, Paris, we did this 13 different times during the Biden administration. 13 times Republicans and Democrats passed a continuing resolution to keep the government funded. So why would they not support it now when they did under the Biden administration? Unfortunately, it's because of politics, and I worry that we're going to have a shutdown because of that.
And what Democrats are saying is that they would like to negotiate to keep around the Affordable Care Act subsidies because this is going to add untold burden to Americans who rely on this for health insurance. Is there any room to negotiate on something like that?
Well, of course there's room to negotiate, but you don't do it when you're bumping up on a deadline where the government's going to shut down. What we've said, and the reason why we did our job in the House, was let's give us another 7 weeks. The Obamacare healthcare tax credits that you referenced, Paris, those don't expire till the end of the year. So let's keep the government open till November 20th. Let's negotiate on that. It's very important that we try to reach a resolution. And the president and Republicans have said we're willing to do that. But don't hold hostage the American people. Don't shut down the government. Let's work to do that. And that's what's at stake here. And so, yes, we should have negotiation on that and try to work to resolve that.
And again, you know, the deadline is 10:59 Chicago time here. As we tape this afternoon, it doesn't look like there's any deal in the offing. But what are the impacts going to be to, let's say, your constituents in central and north central Illinois?
Well, you know, when the government shuts down, that means all the different agencies, Veterans Affairs, Department of Transportation, Interior, means our national parks are closing. It means government is disrupted. Now, people are going to get checks that would normally go out on October 1st. They're going to get their checks. But, you know, if the shutdown continues through the 15th of the month, people are not going to be paid. And government shutdown is never good for the country. We've seen that in the past. The last one we had of any length was 2018. And that was not good. 2013 was not good. And that's why we try not to have these. And so I have implored my Democrat friends, pass the continuing resolution like we did in the House, and let's avoid a government shutdown and keep trying to work together.
All right, I want to shift gears a bit. Governor Pritzker, as you know, yesterday said that he's received word that the Department of War, as it is called now, is planning a contingent of about 100 military service members to come to Chicago. Is that an appropriate use of the U.S. military to come to a place like Chicago when the governor, the mayor, local officials have not asked for them?
Well, it is when you have a problem like you have in the city of Chicago and Cook County with crime. I'm a former assistant state's attorney in Cook County. I was a former prosecutor there. I was also a former federal prosecutor. I wish we didn't have to contemplate bringing in federal law enforcement to help clean up crime in Chicago. But that's part of the problem. And much of it stems from the fact that over the last 4 years under the Biden administration, we had sanctuary city, sanctuary state policies where we brought in all these illegals from mostly the southern border. And you know, we had drug cartels and criminals and gangs that are coming in, not all of them, but many of them. And it's caused a lot of problems in the city of Chicago. And so, yeah, the fact that the president and others are asking for the National Guard to come in to help is something that we ought to embrace to do that. If you look at the city of Washington, D.C., that's had National Guard troops on the streets for the last 2 months, carjackings are down 87%. Murders are down almost 80%. Crime in general is down. People feel safer. It's worked in D.C. The Democrat mayor of D.C. Has embraced and worked with the federal officials on that. I wish that Governor Pritzker and the mayor of Chicago would do the same so that we can help clean up some of these tough areas in Chicago, these difficult areas that need help.
You mentioned tough areas, although on Sunday we saw dozens of armed federal agents in camouflage masks and long guns walking around Michigan Avenue on a Sunday. Not a tough area, a relatively safe area. Doing an immigration enforcement, you had Commander Gregory Bavino of Customs and Border Patrol saying to the Sun-Times that they were identifying people based on how they looked to stop them and ask them for their papers. Is this an appropriate use of Customs and Border Patrol?
Well, you mentioned what you saw, Paris. I saw many people that were having dinner or that were congratulating the National Guard for being in Chicago. And they were saying thank you for coming to Chicago to help clean it up. So I think there's been mixed opinion on what people think. But the bottom line is when you see the National Guard on a street corner, whether it's on the west side of Chicago or in Inglewood or on Michigan Avenue, it's going to deter someone from engaging in crime. It's going to deter a carjacking or someone trying to take someone's purse or wallet or engage in violent activity. And that's really what we want to stem here. And it's not only Chicago, it's Portland, it's Memphis, it's New Orleans. And by the way, the governor of Louisiana, who's a Republican, the governor of Tennessee, who's a Republican, they've embraced having the National Guard want to come in to help clean up their cities. Governor Hochul, a Democrat in New York, last year brought in the National Guard to go on the subway system to help clean up crime. Again, there's example after an example where the National Guard has come in to help clean up crime. We need that in Chicago, unfortunately, and hopefully we'll have cooperation on that.
Our thanks to Congressman LaHood and Senator Duckworth. And when we come back, environmental and consumer advocates urge Springfield to bring electricity rates down.